Uh, so today we have a very, very special guest with us. We have Anupam Raj. So Anupam did his master's from NIT Srinagar. He did his master's in physics. And now he's doing his second master's in US, University of Maine, in teaching astronomy and physics. He's a passionate science educator, and he spent his last few years exploring about science education and the landscape in India. He's been associated with organizations like Avishkar, Homi Bhabha Institute of Science Education, Teach for India, University of Illinois, Chicago, and many more. Last few years, Anupam spent time doing his own research about how he can impact the science education space in India. And with this idea and his vision, he wants to come back and take science education to rural parts of India with special focus on teacher education. Um, so here, I would hand over to Anupam to just speak a little bit about science education in 21st century.
Okay. So should I introduce what science education should look like in summary in 21st century, or is there a specific question that you answer?
Science education in 21st century.
Okay. So I believe definitely the countries who are going to pay attention to science education in the 21st century are the countries who are going to be world leaders. If you look at this scenario right now, most of these countries who are actually leading right now in terms of economics and politics, or in terms of all the major decisions that we take as as a globe together, these are the countries who focus a lot on science. It's embedded in the culture, it's embedded in the education system very well, and it's how they think basically. So I do believe it's a very important thing. I'm not saying that arts is not important at all. I definitely believe it's as important as science. But when it comes to leading and when it comes to capitalism, science plays the most important role for sure. And so it's really important that as a country we start to focus on this, and not just for the purpose of education itself, but for our growth as a nation as well.
Okay. So Anupam, I just want to understand from you, so since you've spent a couple of years doing your own research, what are the few challenges that you faced? What are the challenges that you witnessed when it comes to science education in India? What was your experience of, what is your understanding or your experience for the last 2-3 years?
That's a very interesting question. The first thing I would say is for sure that most of us already know what are the basic challenges that we have in science education. For example, if you look at the data of how many people actually appear for the 12th board science exams, it's roughly 15 lakhs. We do know that out of them, maybe 50,000 will get into good colleges. And then these good colleges have their own problems, like IITs and AIMSs and all these medical colleges and everything. But the most important pool of people, which represent more than 95% of these people, is these 14 lakh 50,000 people who don't get anywhere in these so-called reputed colleges. And where do they go? And to these local colleges that we have at the university level. And the challenges in those places, it's not very difficult for any of us to guess what in terms of infrastructure, in terms of poor teaching quality, in terms of resources that we have. So the biggest challenge for science education that I've felt around the community in India right now is how to improve that, which is very obvious, but it doesn't seem to have one answer which could drastically change it. I wouldn't talk about right now that how we should make our really good institutes even better, but the normal ones which where the most of our students are going, it seems maybe it's not just enough to do something on the classroom level at times. It's something needs to happen at the policy and curriculum level, maybe in terms of how much the government is investing. So sometimes you do feel as a researcher that your hands are really tied, because teachers is not coming. I mean, where do you even apply all those results that you get from research. Even the basic fundamental like infrastructure is not there. So that's definitely one thing I feel as a researcher in science education we have, that there are very few basic things that needs to be there at least, which I have seen definitely in like schools in there, like definitely providing the basic resources that students need, and then that's a platform where researchers can start to apply their learnings to bring it even further, like the education level. But the most important thing definitely I feel like is the like existence of fundamental stuff that should be there in a classroom, even to start learning and applying the research that we do.
Um, so also, like you're studying in US right now, and when it comes to science, like we as people look up to US in terms of the advancement in technology they've made. What are the few differences that you've seen in the public schools in US and public schools in India when it comes to science education?
Uh, I would say that is definitely not a very short answer to that. Uh, in like, so when you teach in a classroom, there are like, I feel like there are two things that feed that student in that classroom. Like when you compare to a student in the US schools to a student in a public school in India. First, like how, with what mindset do they come in the classroom? What kind of things we are feeding them before even they enter into the classroom. Uh, by that, what I mean is like what is like the culture promoting in general. I'll give you an example. So like I feel like rational thinking is something, or critical thinking is something which is not generally promoted in our country. Like for example, my mom will like often say that you should not cut your nails at night. It's not a good thing, and I'll be like, why? And she will be like, I mean, she'll be like, it's just not a good thing. Just believe what I'm saying and do not try to act over smart about it. So like the very from the very fundamental like beginning, when you're starting to grow up in your family, you're not encouraged to challenge things, like to think critically about things and why they happen. Like the evidence-based thinking is definitely not there. Like we just like have a lot of respect for authorities. We have a lot of respect for elders, which is a good thing. But when it comes to like studying science, we do not want you to like respect it when you're in the classroom. We want you to like have an agency when you're thinking about things and challenge what you are studying so that you can go beyond them. And that's one thing definitely like which you will find, like when I'm teaching, for example, here in a classroom, I feel like students have this confidence to ask me and say like, I don't think so this law is right, or I don't think so this theory should work this way. Which in India, like everybody's like, even the teacher will start the topic as, so we are going to study Newton's second law today, as if it's like Newton was such a god thing, and this is like a law which you should definitely respect and pay attention to. And if you do not follow the rules, you might not be able to enter into the realm of physics at all, which is like very different compared to here, where people are like, let's just see what this guy did and build it from scratch, and we can understand it for ourselves too. So like the basic confidence that society gives an individual when they enter into the classroom is very different for sure. And then there is the whole resources and policies and curriculums and stuff.
Can I jump in?
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so that's very interesting, Anupam, and something is coming up. So when you're saying, for example, you took the example of cutting nails. So there is a belief, there is a culture which is around, right?
Mm-hmm.
What we can also call it as the example which you gave as the cutting nail thing. Now let us try to understand this from another context. Now when I say, let's say for example, there is a I give this example a lot, but I'm just trying to understand, because there are a lot of, I see science somewhere being a hallmark of even philosophy. If you talk about epistemology, ontology, somewhere science has taken over a lot of theories. Somewhere we have so much believed in the culture of positivism, as Henry Giro calls it, that we are forgetting the whole intuitive part of it. To quote an example from Professor Wade Davis, now what he says is, I'll just give an example. See, for in, let's say in a village, there is a hill, and people are worshipping that hill. Now that's a superstition. So when we say superstition, it's not a god. Why do you worship it? But when you teach those people, you set up a school there, you teach the kids that this is not god, you need not worship it, just a hill, it's just a piece of rock. then students understand it as a piece of work and they're ready to mine it without accounting for the ecological footprint of it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you see in the ecological sense, I'm not saying there should not be a development, of course. But if you see the ecological sense, that superstition was doing way better than what that piece of rock is doing. So in that way, where do you place the whole scientific rationality argument?
Okay. So I would just ask you one question to like answer your question. So like, would you rather want to teach your kids the importance of ecology and environment, and that's why they shouldn't mine there, and that's why they should conserve our environment that we have today? Or should we just tell them you should do it because it's related to some kind of fear? There is a God. If you do that, it's gonna like create a bad sense in you. What kind of kids we want to grow up in our society, who are sensible enough to understand that environment is important, or who are scared enough that if I do this, God's gonna punish me? It's a question, like we have to answer it.
See, no, that's, in fact, if I think rationally again, what you're saying, the later part of it makes sense. You don't want kids to grow up believing a superstition anything. But if you see the efficacy of an argument, of a method, for example, if we teach kids about violence, about abuse, that doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't going to be a violence in the society. Or let's say when you teach kids values, ethics, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is effectively going to be harnessed by the kids in their daily day-to-day life. What I'm arguing here is, what I'm trying to understand rather, is that teaching something may not effectively have those results which we want. So when you take students from their own culture in that sense, because I say somewhere that is part of their culture, their belief system, when you take them away from their own identity in that sense, and which is affected the environment, I'm not saying that I'm pro superstition. That's not the idea which I'm trying to say, that you should not let crash their beliefs or this thing. I'm just saying the method which we are employing is not really effective in that sense. So where do we see the balance?
Okay. I'm definitely not trying to like take the second argument. I'm just doing it for the sake of the argument itself too. I definitely understand, like, and this is one thing, like, I'm sure like every Indian educator has to think about it, because we as a society, like as a nation, come with a very rich culture and a very like a spiritual culture, I would say. And then we are trying to introduce the science as well, which is rational, which is very crude, which is very objective. And we don't know how these guys are going to blend together. And that is something which is very unique to Indian education system problem, like which everybody will have to think and bargain that which part we want to keep and how much of it, and which part we want to introduce. Because you cannot teach a student to be objective at the same time believing in something which is not there and he cannot experimentally see it. So definitely, it's definitely an ethical discussion which we all need to have and keep back in our heads when we are thinking about our students.
Saurabh, you have a question?
Yeah. So, Anupam, I mean, Jasleen was telling us about, your experiences with teaching science and, probably finding out new ways of doing it. Would you like to share some of those experiences? That'll be amazing to know.
Okay, perfect. So like, I'll use an example, I think, because example works the best when you have to explain something. What I feel like the most fundamental difference that I have seen in terms of teaching science, or the way the science is taught here compared to back home, is like in India, like when you get there, our idea is to impart knowledge to students. Like, I'm not even getting to that part of the India, which basically where teachers is just trying to make people memorize stuff so that they can cram and come back in the exam and puke and just get the grades out. That is like definitely, everybody knows that's a problem. But even in good schools, we feel like we impart knowledge. Like a good teacher in India will have these two qualities. Either he's very good with the concepts, he can explain everything really well, how everything connects with everything, he can answer all your questions. You're very lucky if you have a teacher like that in India. It's very rare to find those. And then there will be some teachers who will show you some demonstrations, which is like a new thing in India right now, like hands-on activities is what we say. And these two things are usually what we're trying to focus on right now, which is like a gradual process. And I don't mean to say it's a bad thing. It's definitely in the right direction. But what I see here on the contrary is like hands-on activities mean completely different here. So like it's not just enough to watch a teacher do a pendulum experiment in the classroom in front of everybody where the pendulum is going up and down and you are trying to trying to see the proof that he's trying to give you and you're being fascinated and interested by it. That's one part of it, which is okay sometimes. But here, like teachers would give you different kind of pendulums, different kind of strings, and they want you to investigate like for yourself that how when you add different things to it, how the whole process changes. So it's not hands-on is like hands-on and minds-on together. Like you're not just like they're trying to demonstrate something to make science look cool, but you're also asking students to actively engage in it, the process, actively collect the data, actively analyze it, and actively form something called their models of how things are working before even they go to the bookish equation of how they're working, whatever the scientists came up with. So like students are very much encouraged from the beginning to like think in terms of models, right from the middle school itself, which is very rare. Like I have only heard this term like model thinking when I was in Homi Bhabha, and some of the researchers were working about it. And I was like, oh my God, that sounds like a very amazing idea. So like in science, when you're teaching about acid, base, and salts, and when you're teaching about Newton's law, when you're teaching about how ecology works or evolution, for example, all these things like have a common theme. They all are basically models. They are not like perfect laws. They could totally be changed next year or like maybe in the next decade. What is fundamental about all of these different things that we teach in science is that of something called a model-based thinking, where we intuitively build a model with all the things that we find in our environment. And then we check and experiment to see if our models are right. And when we find results that are good, we say, yeah, our model is working. When we don't, we try to improve it. And that's most fundamental if you want to bring students who are scientific thinkers in a society, that they learn how to build models. They learn how to like meticulously analyze every part of a system, collect data, analyze it, build a hypothesis, and check it. These are like the things that they want to develop in their students. They don't want them to know a lot of things like Newton's law and like electricity and magnetism and nuclear physics and everything. You know a lot in Indian education system. You end up learning a lot of things, but none of this is like really yours because you did not build it from the scratch. You just accepted some things that are there intellectually and you felt like, yeah, this is good enough. But here it feels like you're trying to create your knowledge. There's an agency in it. You're encouraged to think like a scientist rather than just know what science is around you. So that's definitely one thing I've felt. And I was really happy and shocked at the same time to know that this kind of teaching can also be done.
Right. So what is the kind of teacher to student ratio in such a system where it is your more model based approach and things?
I would say I have usually seen, like, it depends on these, like, population of the high school as well, in which district you are, what kind of population the state has. But in general, like, I have seen like 20, 15 students per teacher is usually the ideal ratio here. Because again, like the population of the US is like 1/4 compared to the India. So definitely the classroom sizes are like really small. So yeah, I would say 15 to 20 is maybe the average range.
Right. And do you think like the average high school in the US compares with let's say an average private school in India? Good private school, how we call it. As far as the facilities are concerned when it comes to science education in higher secondary.
I would say definitely not. Like if you pick a random school from the US and try to compare it with a random school from India, which is like in a small place, for example, like the state I live in, you can totally think of it like a Jharkhand of India. Like nobody really knows about it, but it exists. And even in here, like the university I go to, like I felt like this is like not even in the top 200 rankings. So it would be like a normal school. And I wasn't expecting much, but then we have professors who are like member of like Royal Society and like they're so talented and they're so invested. And the most important thing I find here is the teachers and students are very honest in their work. Like if you ask a question and if they don't know about it, they will say that they don't know about it. It's not like they will talk bullshit through it, which is very weird thing for me, because I have always seen teachers who would like try to save their reputation by answering whatever, which basically kills more of their reputation when they do that. And like the student was asking something else, the teacher answered something else, and you're like, the class is over. Uh, so that's what I felt like. Everybody, whatever they are doing, even their lecturer or their professors or their like small school teachers, they are very honest towards it. Like they wouldn't do a job in which they're not like giving at least 70 or 80% of themselves. And they're like, there's this whole like code of conduct underlying fact that you are here for learning yourself. Nobody's forcing you to be here. And the teachers and the professors know that they're here to teach because they like to teach, and nobody's forcing them to do this. So that's definitely one thing that I have found in these classrooms to be different in terms of mindset of how they teach and how they learn.
Right. So, I mean, you've been in two universities in India and two universities in the US now, and so like in India, you've been to both a private university and an institute of national importance. Um, how do you compare the management structures, or the code of ethics, and all the similar things that you just talked about between the US and India?
Uh, that's a very good question. So in India, like just to like reiterate, I went to Amity from undergrad, and then I went to NIT Srinagar for my master's, and here I was in UIC, and now I'm at U Maine right now. I would say in terms of resources, definitely like America had like everything that you needed to succeed, like your labs, your computers, your AC classrooms, and everything, and enough resources available to you to succeed in any way, compared to like our back home, like where somewhere sometimes there was not even enough water to even get ready for the classes. It was a problem back in NIT, for example, or like there was like very different and restricted criteria for learning. Back in Amity, attendance, for example, was a compulsory thing, which is very weird. So definitely, like in terms of a lot of issues, there was a lot of difference. And in summary, what I would say is, like if you end up in a random school in the US and you're hardworking, you can succeed. It doesn't really make a difference which school you go to, apart from like having a little bit of brand on your CV. Compared to India, like unless you are very self-motivated, it's very hard in our education system to succeed. It's very hard. I've seen like out of my graduating class, like it was like 23, only 3 to 4 people actually made it to a grad school or to a good school or to a good life right now. And mostly because they were all hardworking in themselves. It wasn't teachers at all. Like none of them will give credits to any of the teachers or any of the education that they got in the university. They all studied by themselves. They all studied books, watched YouTube lectures from everywhere else, and they succeeded. Same with NIT as well. And compared to here, where you feel like if you work hard, there are people who can answer your questions. There are people who would encourage you to go through it. So the amount of self-motivation you need here in this country, I feel like it's a little small compared to in India, where you have to juggle a lot with the system, with everything, and then come up through it, hopefully, if you are a very motivated person to be successful. I don't know if I answered that question, but yeah, that's what I felt at least.
Thank you.
I have a question. Can I go?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we speak a lot about how learning by doing is important, and activity-based learning and hands-on. But when it comes to an infrastructure thing or a resource thing, how important is it? Or can a teacher, or should a teacher be guided so that they can do without it? Because a lot of the times I've seen, at least in my minimal experience, that the teachers are like, hey, we don't have the resources, I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to show them a video and get it over with. Whereas on the other hand, you'll see another couple of set of teachers in the same, within, say, the municipal corporation itself, who go out of their way to do it, right? So is there some sort of normalization, standardization? Or first question is, how important is it in your opinion? And secondly, what can be done to sort of normalize the fact that like science is not just about what you have, but what you can make with what you have? Maybe something like that.
Thank you. That's a very good question. I would definitely say that. So when I was in Homi Bhava, I was working on this project called like in which we were trying to make mobile kits for schools, like government schools, which do not have like lab facilities. We were trying to come up with everyday things like incense sticks, for example, or like matchsticks, and use all these like everyday things which you can find in the house, and try to show like physics experiments and demonstrations through them, the principles. That was like the whole goal. And I have definitely thought about this, like how could we do this in India, like when we do not have enough resources. First thing first, you definitely need resources to do good level of experimentations. Like there's no substitute to that. Like if you want to read something, if you want to read the Bible, for example, the first thing you need is the Bible. So if you want to experiment at a really good level, the first thing is you need is the labs at those levels. So that's definitely cannot be ruled out that we will never need it and we will understand all of the science by just doing stuff from our everyday life. But I should also say that definitely if the teacher is creative, science is definitely all around us as well, and we can use things that are happening in our everyday life, so small things about how things work, and bring it into the classroom and show the science phenomenon as well. And I think that's where right now, if researchers in India like who are working in science education needs to focus on, because given that we do not have that big GDP as the US, or that much money contributed to education at this stage, we definitely need to think about creative ways in which we can bring these mobile kits or like cheap equipments into the classroom, which can help us show as much as we can the science we want to show. But at the same time, that shouldn't saturate us, I would say. And we should also look for ways in which policies and investments can change so that every school can get a lab too. Like I was really happy to know, like for example, I think adult tinkering labs that exist in a lot of schools in India, which is a very good example of what kind of labs we really need to actually teach science. But yeah, I would definitely like have a balanced view of this question, that you can definitely do it, but it's not going to be as good as actually working in a lab, because we do need the lab. Like biking and having a motorbike, like is totally different. You can definitely have the same experience as a two-wheeler, but some things take you very fast and takes you very far away land. You compared to this, which is very difficult. Like you cannot bike to like, I don't know, like the example I cannot think of it, like from Chandigarh to Delhi. Like I mean you can in extreme cases, but it will be really helpful to have a motorbike to do that. So I would definitely say both of them are really important.
Cool. Thanks.
I want to ask one. So Anupam, what I was thinking, if we see in recent times, not recent, but yeah, there has been a lot of mushrooming of colleges in terms of science education. So you see NIT, the plan is to have every one NIT in every state, and IIT, 7 IITs came in one jiffy. So on one hand, it is being argued that this is not a great idea because this compromises the quality, because there is a mushrooming of colleges. But on the other hand, the argument is that even after so many colleges, or let's say so many seats, these are still not enough. People are still finding it hard to find a seat. So this accessibility and quality issue, which India is grappling with in that sense, what do you see about it?
I think it's again, it's a very interesting topic to think about for sure. And I definitely believe that if we talk about the state of science education in India, it's not what is happening in IITs. It is what is happening in an unknown university in Uttar Pradesh, for example, which people don't even know names about, and where teachers don't come to the class, and there is not even a lab, and there are like 700 people who are graduating into the BSc physics program. So like, because it's very simple maths. Like look at the number of population who read studies in this universities, this prestige universities, compared to all the local universities that we have. It's more than 95%. So we cannot use this just 5% to like represent what Indian science education is and should look like in the future. And yeah, and instead of like increasing the number of IITs and NITs and AIMS colleges all over India, I feel like the most important thing is to increase the quality of education we are providing in a local university. And that point cannot be like overemphasized enough, because this is something which nobody is definitely talking about. I don't know why. it's again, it boils down to like qualitative and quantitative thinking. People don't think in terms of numbers. It's very hard for people to think about it in that way. And if we could just think about it, like it's crazy. Like 95% of the people are going to this colleges, and you're not even trying to do anything about it. You're just trying to like give people hopes basically by creating these new NITs and IITs that yeah, like if there are more seats, my kid can go to a college one day. And our education system is the most competitive education system in the world, like, and we have the most talented students in anywhere in the world comparatively. But again, if we look at the output, the amount of research we produce is like not even 1/10 of the amount of research the other countries are producing. The amount of Nobel laureates, for example, 7 maybe. Out of them, 4 were like US citizens. So compare that to other countries which are like 300 and 400 Nobel laureates in their countries. Even though we produce like 15,000 brilliant IITs, like IITs every year, and like so many good doctors every year, which have the potential to do really great. What is lacking is how we channel them like to that and from there. So I definitely think yes, we need to work more on these local universities compared to like creating more NITs and IITs. That's never going to help the whole state for sure.
So Anupam, I had a question. So there is this very famous professor. His name is Professor Manish Jain, and he teaches at IIT Gandhinagar.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the reason why he's famous for. He's basically famous for these creation labs or workshops that he does. Wherein he encourages young students to make things out of small objects like straws and glasses with water in it and stuff like that. So that it encourages model making and all these things. And he's been doing this for almost a decade now, and he's given TED talks and everything. Are there so like you also interned at this amazing place, Homi Baba Innovation Center, or I'm not completely familiar with the name.
Institute of Science Education.
Yes. So are there similar experiments being done over there? Like you guys, when young people like you who enter there who are so passionate about education, are you guys coming up with new ideas, and those ideas are being implemented or taken forward somehow? Is that happening?
Uh, that's again a very good question, and I would definitely say that I have thought about that a lot too here. And I don't remember, like there was also one person from Bihar who is also doing this at a very large scale where he like uses
Arvind
every
Gupta.
Yes, thank you so much for bringing that. Yes, that name. And I have seen this thing happening in India that we need to build something from the scratch and the waste that we have and teach science out of it. Uh, but compared to here in schools, I feel like most of the schools have at least enough resources to like not need those things. So I haven't seen that kind of labs happening here for sure. Rather the focus is like they have like moved beyond that point where we need to bring hands-on science into the classroom, and they're more onto like how do you investigate these hands-on experiments. So they wouldn't have so many experiments like, but they will have some experiments in the classroom before they teach. These are called anchoring phenomenons like here, and then students investigate these slowly and nicely and like by varying different parameters. So I would not say like that they're trying to build a lot of mobile kits at this time for sure, because most schools have resources enough to like bring the right kind of demonstrations that you need. So you do not need to like need to use straws to make waves to show how the waves work. They can actually create waves in their classroom using equipments, which is like a
So
good thing for us because we are more creative. I'm sorry, Jasleen, go ahead.
yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt. I think Saurav was asking, like, is a similar kind of thing happening in India, like something that you experienced at Homi Baba, like the kids that you're preparing?
Mm-hmm.
Like, are they planning to scale that up to more government schools and low income schools? Are they planning, like, how are they planning to scale this up? Because the kits are required, labs are required to run science experiment to give, quality education. So while interning, what was your experience in terms of scaling
Oh.
the programs that you researched?
the whole, there is a, as I said, there is a culture of positivism which is taking roots big way inside the policy regime. So when we when we say that whole policy is being shifted towards this whole idea, um, you know, I don't know, like I don't feel a lot comfortable about it, because when we say evidence, I feel that we do away with nuances. When evidence are more of an utilitarian kind of an idea, that, and it can never have the nuance part of it. So which again is, if you have the nuances, where do you have the evidence? You have to have the data, because you have to look at the data, and when you look at the data, we have to think of the larger thing. I understand it. For that you have to somewhere move towards evidence based this thing. But I'm more concerned about the as a social science person who moved from sciences. I see it as a there is a small problem also, that we forget the nuances. So I don't know how to make sense of all this.
So like, are you can you like distill your question a little bit? Like, do you mean like how should we, like as a culture, the nuances that we have in our society, like this space that we have, how should that be compatible with the new scientific thinking that we're trying to build? Is that what is the question?
In a way, but what I'm talking about is the big idea of taking science as the epitome of doing any policy. For example, when I say there is data, when we say the evidence based research, so data wise things, it is evidence based. There are evidence based policies which come out of it, but we that evidence based policy or that data will not be able to cater to the small nuances part of the research, that way the qualitative part of it. So that way I'm trying to understand, one, it is again a conflict that I myself understand that you cannot have nuances in every per se, because when you about the policy has to take a stand. It has to take a utilitarian view. It has to take a majoritarian view in that sense. But again, I'm also conflicted that where are the nuances in that sense. Am I making sense? I don't know.
Maybe can you give me an example for where you see the nuances happening?
Okay, for example, let's say talk about education. Say, so when we are talking about let's say there is a research study being conducted. So when you are now there is the let's say the LGBT movement is there. Now the whole evidence which will work if you conduct surveys or if you take any methodology in that sense. So the number as such which are out in public of people from the LGBT community are very low in that sense. So when the policy is framed, when we talk about evidence-based research, when we talk about any evidence-based policies, it will not be able to cater to the nuances of that community. It cannot be that inclusive because the numbers are very low. Evidences will not be able to cater to them. So that sense, when we're talking about the data being used as a way, the evidence being used as a way of doing framing policy and everything, it forgets the nuances of such communities. So it is not, what I feel is not inclusive in that per se. So again, it can be or cannot be is a question, because you cannot have everything. You have to have some majority kind of an idea, but it's still a conflict which I deal with.
Thank you for clarifying that. Uh, I think I would say that in a very short way that science is not the answer for every question, but it is the closest, most effective tool that we have. Like for example, in this LGBT case, like maybe I don't know the numbers exactly, and when I'm forming policies and everything for them, it might not be very precise. But what alternative do I have? Like apart from looking at the number that I have, like then I will be making assumptions that there are this many people, maybe that many people. But then assumptions have like no definitive direction. Then you can assume anything that you want. Then you bring your personal bias into the research. So definitely, it's not always the most effective tool, but it is the closest thing we have to the most effective we can ever be.
No, Priyank. So I think I have a comment on that actually. Maybe it's a kind of information that you're looking for. I think the way so definitely the Western world has developed a particular way of doing scientific research, and it is evidentary that it works, right? and that is how Japan, South Korea, China adopted them very well, and so on and so forth. But one of the things that I always wondered was, and I always find a little disconcerting also, is like other cultures. We have been, as a human civilization, we have been creating inventions for a long time, right? How we define science and how we define experiments might be different from how somebody in Europe defines them, but nevertheless it is science, and nevertheless we will reach the same kind of techniques anyhow, right? You Scientific observation and experimentation, they're not fundamentally very different. So what maybe the definitions vary a little bit, and when you say that it is evidence based approach, the nuances get missed over there. I think with respect to science, the nuances ultimately more or less will reach the same conclusions anyhow, because the result will have to be something that you are aiming for. If it's a wheel that you're making, it has to be round in shape, it has to be smooth enough to take you distances. So no matter how you approach the problem, if you solve the problem, that should be evidence enough, right? And like, scientists mostly will be able to find a path which is kind of a path for a least resistance. At the same time, it lets go of all the other extra dimensions to the problem that there are. So I think when it comes to science education, nuances matter very little in today's world. I think it's more it's only based on the language that the nuances matter, because everywhere else the scientific education pretty much is the same, research included.
I don't know, like we are sleeping out of time, but I definitely like to just mention one small point. See, again, that's what I said. Now I maybe I have a bias, but I think that's where my problem lies. That that we might say that we have to work on the majoritarian idea because somewhere the policy has to come in and it has to. But again, the problem is that uh, uh, doing away with these nuances and talking about a policy which may be evidence based or positivist or in sense that can never ideally reach uh, a society which you are imagining which is egalitarian in that per se is something which will not be inclusive in that sense. So again a conflict. I don't know.
I think, yeah, that will always remain. Those are small little things. I mean, say if a community has perfected a particular way of disseminating information, and if you just outrightly neglect it. For example, if you talk about these if you ever go to Bali, Indonesia, after COVID-19, there is this very famous cultural dance that they have, which basically depicts Ramayana. All right. So they're basically depicting the Vanar Sena, and the Vanar Sena is actually doing a particular dance and show which talks about Ramayana. So that particular art form is probably culturally relevant, artistically relevant to them, and it is a very unique thing to see. It's one of those celebrations of human ingenuity. But just saying I can do it better, I can just read the Ramayana on a Kindle, I can just watch a minute infographic video, kind of disregards that entire generation of cultural ingenuity. So if I think if that is what you're pointing at, that will, I think, happen, and that is what is the sad side effect of evolution, I guess.
I think we need to head to more questions now.
Yes.
let's let's keep this at bay.
I like both of the
We have 10 minutes more.
So like, you guys have a really interesting perspective. So
Yeah. So Anupam, so you had plans to come back and do something for your community. Like, you are from Bihar and you've seen, like, people don't talk about science really. Like, it's all ruled by superstition, religion, and other factors. So, to get in those kind of communities, what are the few things that you would like to share with our audience? Like, what are the kind of work that you aspire to do in such kind of communities?
so that's like my life plan being discussed here. I think personally, I have also very a spiritual person as I was growing up, and I have realized that the happiest I feel is when I am contributing in some way or the other. So that's a good thing for me, that I don't need to worry too much about my financial success or my career success. So once I'm talented enough to help, I just want to go back and help. Uh, the things that I want to do basically at this stage, like I'm not 100% sure. Uh, I just don't definitely want to teach in a school where I talk to 30 people and like that's it. Uh, but I also understand that those roles are very important too. I do not mean to undermine the role of an everyday teacher, but I definitely want to try that and do that and learn it for myself. But then once I have some experience with this, that how I bring something which is very advanced and Western into a small classroom, then I might want to like create a model out of it and then pass it on to like different teachers who can use it further as well. So yeah, first idea will be experimenting a little bit when I come back for a few years to see what works, what doesn't work, in what context. And then once I have something which is solid, then I will try to like give it away to people to use it as well. Because again, like leadership is very important. Like it's the more we teach these teachers, we are indirectly teaching our students as well. So definitely somewhere down the line, I see myself like being a education leader and trying to help the system in whatever way I can. Maybe on a policy, maybe as a teacher trainer, maybe whatever role comes in. Like I'm not concerned with what level it will be. What I'm concerned effective it can be, and where I can reach maximum people in the most efficient way.
I have
Bihar needs a politician.
I have a question. I don't know. I'm late to join the session, so I have a question. You said that you want to transform the rural parts of the country. You said that, but you want to give some like you want to focus on teacher training. So how do you think, like what do you think, that what is the first training that you would like to give to the teachers in terms of transforming the science education in the country?
Oh, that's a deep question.
Any random thing you can tell me. It just came in my mind. So
Yeah,
I thought
but
to ask.
that's the thing. I don't want to say a random answer just for the sake of it. Let me think about it for 10 seconds. Um, so I think the most important thing I feel like in rural India is the discrimination that we have at some level. And I feel like the first idea will be to bring this somehow the scientific objectivity to understand that we all are the same human beings and there is no actual difference based on caste, color, creed, or whatever. And I don't know how I'll do that exactly. I will definitely give you a call and we can think about it together. But yeah, sure. I feel like if we can, like, science shouldn't just be all about like bringing technology into the world of people. It should also be about bringing more like compassion into people's heart. Like, how do we use this tool to see this world in a better way as well? And when I think about education in India, I always like refer back to this model that Gandhiji had of hand, head, and heart. And I feel like it's really important to like, if I could just make people see each other in a better way and make people see other professions in a better way, like the vocational trainings that happen in, or the carpenters or the small people who work in these villages, with them look at them, the students, if they're looking at them at the same respect as they would look at a doctor and an engineer. The mindset, first of all, like thinking objectively about it, that these guys are also playing a role, these guys are also playing a role, these guys are also playing a role. I think that would be like the best, the first move I will definitely want to make if I come to India.
So I have a very
Justin, I have a follow-up.
okay.
We're running out of time, so I want to definitely see the one thing we just spoke about just now is objectivity. Now the objectivity of science is something which I have a lot of problem with. Like, somehow we in India per se, or let's say whenever I talk to teachers, somehow they tend to believe that science is very objective. They tend to say that 1 + 1 is always 2, which I like. In a way, in teaching per se also, there's no one who's asking that, when you do 1 + 1, what is that one? It is always true. I keep telling people that it is not always true. You have to know what is one there. If you don't know what is one, it may be that 1 + 1 is not 2. It simply teaching 1 + 1 is 2 is saying that science in every context is just 2. It is not true. So see this activity in which we put science and forget about the context. I don't know. What do you think about how do we approach this whole mindset?
That's again a very good question, Priyank. I think the word objectivity also mean different things to different people. First, and it's again it depends on how we have been brought up and what kind of culture we have grown up in. For you, what you're saying objectivity is completely different from what I think when I use that word objectivity. And I understand, like in India, we talk about laws in a way as if they're laws and like nothing can be changed about them. And we talk about answers as the right answer and there is nothing else there. But when we like talk about objectivity, like when I talk about it, at least I think about it looking at things as it is, like in as many ways as you can look at it. So like maths, for example, is never about right answers. It's about how many perspectives are there which are possible to reach that right answer. And you can, if you become attached to one of the ways of reaching that answer, that's subjectivity, I would say. But if you're objective enough, you can look at it from different angles as well. That this is also a method, this is also a method, without getting attached to one way of doing it. So it's definitely like how we see that word. It's very, and we need to handle this word very carefully, that it doesn't look like a bland tasteless word in the world of science education, that we just have to be objective, do nothing about it, and just teach whatever is there. I feel like objectivity is just like a sense of looking at it, things, so that you can actually look at things. So I would give you a personal example. I go for this meditation called Vipassana meditation, where where the whole idea is to become objective when you're looking at your breath and when you're looking at your senses, which is like, I mean, you will feel like this sounds very boring, just your breath and do nothing. Like what kind of life would be that? But when you try to experience that thing by just looking at things objectively, you will see that so many different sensations will start to come up in your like breath, which you have never experienced. So looking objectively is like looking meditatively at things, where new things will start to pop up which you have not observed before. That's what I mean when objective. I'm sorry. So just to like clarify, science is very interesting because it's object, is what I would say. I'm as a science educator.
Okay, one last one, definitely the last one. When you look at this whole, for example, US, you see there's a huge demand which has been set basically specifically in science courses about the standardized testing. You see the ask of GRE or the ask of the standardized test, and how you tend to relate the competence of the students with the standardized test. The growing, or let's say after pandemic has reduced, but in general I'm saying the growing need which has been felt by the universities to have a standardized testing, specifically in the sciences. So where do you pitch in about that?
Standardized testing is something which people everywhere in every country hate. I can bet you for that. Even in US, people hate this thing about standardized testing. They criticize it all the time. And what I personally feel is definitely like this is something which constrains educators about what they teach in the classroom and constrains learning and how they learn things. So it basically tries to make everything do the same thing. Like imagine different animals and you're all asking all of them to climb a tree. They all have different abilities, but
Right.
they all ended up doing the same thing. And some of them will succeed, some of them will not, but that doesn't mean that they're not good enough. But one key difference I have found comparatively in our education system compared to the US is these benchmarks. There are more opportunities for you to like at least succeed in these benchmarks. For example, you can take the GRE exam every 21 days. So when you're ready, you can take it at least. Compared to like an IIT-JEE exam, for example, or like any other entrance exam that we have in India, it usually happen once a year. And if the student misses it one day and he had a bad day, he has to waste one complete year. So like our testing system is also not very well developed that we can test people like when they're ready. Like we have to wait 1 year to make sure that everybody comes together again and then we test it. So this also like definitely slows down the process and makes people very nervous because they're like, what happens that day is going to decide my future for the next 1 year. Here, if you're like not very confident, not very well prepared, you can take some time off and you can go back and give the exam again in like a month. So definitely that makes sure that good people, at least so-called good people and smart people, have higher chance of succeeding in this kind of system where you have, again, the US looks at everything else from your co-curricular and extracurricular activities, and all these things are also very important, and not just how much you score in that exam, compared to our country where we have a rank system, like a caste system, and then the people will get the royal colleges, the lower rank people will get the bad colleges. So definitely both have problems, but this one is at least doing much better comparatively, the system itself. And I'm sorry if I sound like I'm trying to lobby the US education system at all. I just like personally feel we are very good. We're very competitive people, but we just need to learn a few things and adapt a few things slowly over time to like get better.
And GRE is GMAT is again conducted by private institutions. In India, J is done by public government. So it creates a huge difference the way we look at the two exams, and we definitely don't want private players to pitch in here because it will again create another set of problems. And government दो ही बार कर दे वही होता है.
That's very true.
I think the time is finished, and so I have to stop the conversation here. And thank you so much, Anupam, for pitching in and just sharing your views on science education. We would love to continue this conversation post this discussion as well. With the core team, with you as well. You can share your ID number so that people can catch up for the conversation. And yeah, thank you so much for being with us, sharing your knowledge, sharing different models of education, and sharing your vision, like what kind of change that you want to create in India. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. It was very interesting talking to all of you, and thank you for those interesting questions. I hope I did not like offend anybody in the conversation, and I hope you all have